Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Fattore, and I am an associate professor in the Department of Political Science here at West Virginia University. I'm also a recipient of one of this year's Humanities Center fellowships. I'm here today to talk to you about my project, which grew out of one of my personal interests. I'm a huge fan of romance novels, which is not something you usually hear academics say out loud. Um, I began reading romance novels back in 2016 after Donald Trump was elected to the presidency. And like many people, I was searching for a coping mechanism to survive the next 4 years. Some people decided to go to the gym. I decided to read romance novels. A friend suggested that I pick up a romance novel by Courtney Milan, telling me about the book and about the author, that I would be happy with the ending and everything would work out. I also learned that Courtney Milan is a lawyer, like many other popular romance writers, which piqued my interest. So I read The Heiress Effect, and it contained a strong female lead, a man who respected her and wanted to be her equal partner, and had some fun challenges along the way to the happily ever after ending, where all the issues are resolved and the couple stayed together. Needless to say, I was hooked. And during the Trump years, I read hundreds of romance novels, some historical, some contemporary, others by diverse authors, and each one of them contained that happily ever after. Interestingly enough, my usual research agenda does not include romance novels. I am an international political economist by trade. I usually study international trade issues and issues pertaining to the World Trade Organization. However, my original sabbatical plans fell apart thanks to COVID. I was supposed to collect data on a project regarding West Virginia economic development, where I had planned to travel around the state and interview various stakeholders to see how their community was approaching economic development. And unfortunately, because of travel restrictions during the spring, summer, and fall of 2020, I wasn't able to do that. So I found myself during my sabbatical in fall 2020, spending a lot of time on social media, specifically what was then known as Twitter. And I had various communities that I follow on Twitter, but one of them is called Romancelandia. And this is a fandom. This is where authors, readers, podcasters, and others who love romance novels, they were incredibly active, and they talked about books and shows they were watching and about life in general. And remember, this was during COVID, so many of them spoke out against Trump-era policies, which I found surprising, not just as a reader, but also as a political scientist, because I had come to romance as an escape from politics, and yet through social media, it felt like Romancelandia was bringing the politics to me. This political flavoring of Romancelandia increased more and more as the pandemic went on, when we were homebound and then into the 2020 presidential election cycle. So through Twitter, I was able to watch as Romancelandia began phone banking on behalf of Democratic Senate candidates in battleground states, and later how they raised money for Stacey Abrams' fair fight to support the Democratic candidates in the Georgia Senate runoffs that happened in January 2021. And if you didn't know, Stacey Abrams is actually a romance novelist along with her political career. As a political scientist, I began to make these connections between this online community of Romancelandia, the consumption of popular romance novels, and increased political activity during the 2020 general election. It was for sure an exceptional election, considering the COVID pandemic, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the looming shadow of the eventual end of Roe versus Wade. That's not to say that all romance readers lean left. I think it's important to define the borders of Romancelandia, especially since popular romance fiction extends beyond and straddles various genres. In this project, I'm specifically talking about the online community known as Romancelandia. This excludes inspirational romance, which is also known as Christian romance, Romancelandia tends to be more liberal, and therefore focuses on romantic fiction that is published by mainstream, non-Christian presses and features sexual contact between the main characters who are adults. This also includes historical, contemporary, and paranormal romance. One thing about romance is there is something for everyone. While more conservative types of popular romance do exist and are consumed by readers, Romancelandia embraces its more liberal, secular fandom. Therefore, it's important to remember that what I'm talking about here is a fandom, Romancelandia, and not all romance readers. It's like saying Taylor Swift fans may not like all types of pop music, even though they really like her type of pop music. So in delving into this project, I borrowed from a lot of different fields and literatures when I began to contemplate the connection between romance literature, fandom, and political activism. It's important to understand that pop culture itself is not removed from politics. People use pop culture as a way to understand the world around them, even if they think of it as escapist. While some consider pop culture to be apolitical, a bevy of other scholars illustrate that pop culture has an effect on people's political behavior and beliefs. Pop culture fortifies narratives of the way things are and the way things should be. Pop culture can be prescriptive and reproductive. It can show how society could be, especially in its treatment of non-majority groups within our current heteropatriarchal society. It is what we see in current popular romance literature. In the past 10 years, romance novels have normalized verbal consent before engaging in sexual contact. Mainstream romance publishers have picked up books that portray same-sex relationships, even though independent and self-published authors had been way ahead in that realm. Other political issues, such as the Me Too movement, sexual harassment, and workplace bullying, have become narrative devices in popular romance literature. As Cynthia Enloe and Bell Hooks both wrote, the personal is indeed political, and we can see that reflected in the stories contained in modern romance literature. What is considered to be political in our pop culture does not need to be constrained to government and policy. In our world, everything is political. I also connect this to the study of ontological security, which originates from philosophy, but has also been used by political scientists. Ontological security refers to an internally held feeling of security that is produced by belonging, a sense of stable identity and continuity in one's place in the world. People usually find this stability in the continuity of their country. So when we think about past elections prior to Donald Trump, we can think about, yes, there were ideological differences between the candidates, but our idea of what America is and what America stands for did not change very much. However, with the election of Donald Trump in 2016, people of various intersectional identities felt threatened due to his Make America Great Again platform, which reflects a time when the United States was rife with racism, sexism, xenophobia, and homophobia. Trump's election in 2016 can be seen as a critical situation in relation to ontological security. These critical situations produce anxiety and fear in relation to one's identity being challenged and their survival being threatened. People of various backgrounds felt threatened by Trump's electoral victory due to his own campaign rhetoric. So in this project, I'm focusing on women's ontological security in the post-2016 period, specifically within the fandom of Romancelandia. According to a survey I conducted of Romancelandia members, many turn to popular romance to escape this political reality. But they also recognize that they were enjoying a fictional world where romantic relationships are centered on mutual respect and love. Modern romance fiction aren't the bodice rippers of the 70s and 80s. Instead, equality, consent, and respect are key features in the romances of today, which is something that was missing from the political rhetoric of the Trump years. Along with the lines of ontological security, I see belonging as another emotion that motivates Romancelandia members into political action. While belonging can be seen at the macro level, as in belonging to a country, we can also consider it from a micro level, such as belonging to a group. While Romancelandia centers on those who love modern romance literature, the connections made in this group goes beyond books. Members choose to engage in this social media community, to be influenced by and to influence others, and to identify as members of Romancelandia. Political scientists have shown that this sense of belonging in social networks increases a person's social capital, which in turn influences their likelihood of engaging in political activities, such as voting or asking for political donations. However, social media has changed how we interact with one another. This isn't your grandfather's bowling league. One way is that fans can form parasocial relationships with celebrities and other figures, where fans feel as though they know a person through their social media posts. Social media creates this expectation that there will be a connection between the fan and the celebrity or the influencer, where the celebrity will reveal more of themselves to their followers, even though that revealing is carefully curated. In recent years, we've seen that celebrity political endorsements create increased feelings of political impact, as well as motivation to vote among some of the young and low propensity voters. Scholars have found that social capital is increased through online interactions and fandoms. And I'll give you a great example. In 2018, Taylor Swift encouraged her fans to register to vote and to support the Democratic challenger in a Tennessee senatorial election through an Instagram post. In the weekend that followed and the weeks that followed, there was a large bump in young people registering to vote, which was actually attributed by many scholars to this post. Fans not only build social capital within their communities, but are also likely to listen when the object of their fandom, for instance, Taylor Swift, or their favorite romance author, speaks out in favor or against a specific political candidate and encourages them to register to vote. This political influencing of Romancelandia emerges from the level of trust and intimacy cultivated by parasocial relationships between popular romance authors and podcasters and its fans. Prior to the advent of social media, authors and fans interacted a few times a year at book signings and various other conventions and events, but social media has made authors and other influencers more accessible. Repeated interactions on social media with authors allows trust to build between them and their fans. So I've described popular romance literature as an ideal, like a sort of utopia where love is love and all people, regardless of their race, their size, their sexual orientation, their income, to name a few, deserve to be loved. For a story to be considered a romance, it must include two things: a central love story and an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending, or what fans call the happily ever after. The romance has been critiqued for being predictable, but readers love that HEA, that happily ever after ending. Through my survey, I learned that readers are hoping for their own HEA, for men who respect their lives and encourage them to reach their own non-romantic goals. They're hoping for a change in the patriarchy, one where romance and partnership is based on equality rather than a relationship within a power dynamic. They see romance literature as an ideal of what society can be, rather than accepting the dominance of men in our current heteropatriarchal reality. One of the most influential statements made within Romancelandia is that romance itself is political. The idea of who gets to be loved and revered and respected is a political topic in itself. Who deserves love? Who can be married? This is all political. This is one of the theoretical connections that I make in my book, that readers are influenced to see their popular romance literature as political, and that makes them more open to become politically involved. I do this in three different ways. First, I use a critical literary approach to explore implicit and explicitly political messaging in the best reviewed books of the Trump era. Second, and I've already mentioned this, I surveyed close to 700 members of Romancelandia in November 2021 to get their views on politics, their beliefs and stances, their sense of belonging to the Romancelandia community, and their opinions about political messaging and romance novels. I also asked them how they felt that the online community of Romancelandia became so politically charged and active during the 2020 general election. And then finally, I interviewed about 30 women who participated in the phone banks organized by a romance-centric podcast called Fated Mates. What I learned from this work is that Romancelandia participants are open to influencing. Many of them see romance as political, and they are willing to follow the charge of romance influencers that recruit them to phone bank or donate money to support Democratic candidates. The community that was built around Romancelandia created trust and support among its among its participants, which made it easier for people to decide to participate politically in any way they chose, whether it was phone banking or donating. They felt supported, and many felt that the community among Romancelandia participants was reinforced. So the community itself was reinforced by their political participation. The real question is whether this was a one-time deal. Was 2020 a blip on the map? 2020 was filled with strife, anxiety, uncertainty, and hostility. Partisanship was taken to new lows, where affective partisanship led to distrust among fellow citizens. In general, women are less likely to engage in political involvement because they are less willing to tolerate argumentativeness and conflict. This, combined with the social isolation due to the COVID-19 pandemic, created a situation where women's political activity could have been at lower levels. However, among the participants of Romancelandia, political activity was strong due to social pressure from influencers in the community. In an interview, the author, Courtney Milan, the very same author who was my pathway into romance literature, was asked if Romancelandia could replicate its political activity in the future. She said, "I don't know. It felt like the perfect storm in so many ways." Another roadblock could be how Twitter has evolved over the past few years after Elon Musk purchased it. It's now X, and many people inside and outside Romancelandia have left the site because of its relaxed rules regarding hate speech, among other reasons. Can Romancelandia organize like it did in 2020 due to the lack of a home among its members that have left the platforms for other social media like Instagram, Blue Sky, or TikTok? However, it's 2024 and Donald Trump is running for president again. It will be interesting to see in the coming months whether the crisis of ontological security returns, if people fear that things will become tumultuous again, and if they're willing to group together to maintain a hold of the Democratic Senate and the presidency. Thank you so much for listening to my talk today. I really enjoyed sharing my research with you, and take care.